somebody, or whatever. But and even my mom one time had a fender bender before she stopped driving, and she actually hit somebody in this church. And after we'd moved here, no, that was winter in. No, that was when we were still at Coral Springs. Yeah, she passed before we moved here. Anyway, she hit somebody in my previous church, and this person said, "I think your mom hit me in the car." Had an accident, and I said, I called her. It took her like 4 or 5 hours to get from Oklahoma City to Tulsa, which is, And I said, "Did you?" And so I said, "Did you have an accident?" She says, "No, I didn't have an accident. I just hit somebody." Well, it was an accident. Okay, this is coming through the speakers. Yeah, last week, I don't know if anybody ever tried to rewatch or watch online, we didn't have any sound, and I re-recorded it the next day and posted it online, just sitting in a room with a camera. But I couldn't figure it out because we thought we fixed everything and all that. Well, my microphone had a break in it. That's why the live stream didn't have any sound last week. It only had ambient sound because there's some speakers some mics in the very back. He picked up a little tiny bit, but it wasn't picking up this mic. So that's why I had to re-record it. But we got a new wire in there, so now I can tell it is actually working. At 8:30, yeah, at 8:30 when I started the service, that wasn't working, and I had to switch to a handheld, and then by 9:45 they got me a different mic, this kind of mic, but the other one had the little wire that goes from the here up to here. It's easy to. I guess it's, it had just broken. And apparently that happens a lot. It's kind of fragile. Luckily you can replace that without replacing the expensive part, which is this part and this part. The wire's not that expensive, but you got to have it. It won't work. So I can tell it's working. So if it'll work for the next hour and 15 minutes, I think we should be okay. But even this one is on its last legs, this wire, and we had to order a couple of new ones. But technology it's really good until it's not. And I have all the old handouts from the last few weeks. I have a new handout that I'm going to actually, Gina, you weren't here last week to hand anything out. Yeah. You want to, this is a little map of David's flight from Saul, which we haven't quite got to yet, but David is going to have to finally run away from Saul. And this is just a map as it talks about all these different places. And as you start to look at it, you'll kind of see that it's all over the place. But all these names of various places that are sound. Some of them are, there's always a few that are familiar, like Bethlehem and Jerusalem, places like that you can kind of find and recognize. And even some of the other ones are a little bit familiar, like, okay, there's the Dead Sea and there's the Mediterranean and et cetera, et cetera. But some of the other names, and you can see from that the red, he's all over the place. And we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'll refer to that when we get to him in his time as a man on the run. So just to kind of pick up sort of where we were, if you remember, we had, there was the episode where Saul gets increasingly paranoid, increasingly jealous. For a second time, he throws the spear at David. Then he actually sends men in the middle of the night or to go get David out of his bed to kill him. But his wife, David's wife, Michal, has learned of this plot, told David to flee, put an idol and some goat's hair in the bed so that they don't find David. And you think, well, okay, that's got to be the last straw. But we have another story where it seems like either Saul has done what he did several times, like, oh, I was wrong, I'm sorry, Either there'd been a period of time and a sort of a reattachment, or once again, we might have a story that's chronologically not quite in the right spot, because when we come to this place where Jonathan seems to be unaware of any of this, and where David was trying to tell his friend Jonathan, Saul's son, the crown prince, that Saul is after him, and Jonathan's like, no. He tells me everything. He wouldn't know that. Jonathan says, well, let's figure it out. And so let's pick it up, and I'm skipping a little bit here to chapter 20. After Jonathan says, well, I'm with you always. You and I are like brothers. We are deeper than brothers. We have this covenant with each other. I will find out. You say my father is going to try to kill you. I haven't heard about it, and this is why we go, well, how can he not hear about it? But he says, well, that's not like him. He's not going to do that. And David says, yeah, he is. So Jonathan says, well, let me check into it. And so let's pick it up at 20:16. It says, Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So these two men are deep in friendship and covenant. And so here's Jonathan's proposal. He says, Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon festival. You'll be missed, because your seat will be empty. And that's where we go, well, after he tried to kill him, would he really expect him to show up for the feast? And that's why either this story is a little bit out of chronology, or there's a big jump of time here. And in the meantime, Saul has said, oh, I was crazy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I mean, there was some sort of rekindling of the relationship. Either way, whether it's a little bit out of order chronologically, or we're just missing the makeup part, here is a situation where David will be expected to show up for this festival. Because remember, he's the son-in-law of the king. He's one of his generals. So when there's a big festival, he's supposed to be there, as if nothing else, as the son-in-law of the king. So we're assuming that it's either been patched up, or this story takes place before the kill him in the middle of the night story. Either way, let's proceed with the story. He says, tomorrow is the new moon festival. You'll be missed, because your seat will be empty. Because David's like, I'm not going to show up for that. He knows that he is a dead man walking. He knows that Saul does want him dead. The day after tomorrow, towards evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began, and wait by the stone easel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I were shooting at a target. I'll send a boy and say, go find the arrows. If I say to him, look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here, then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you're safe. There's no danger. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are beyond you, you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever. So don't come to the festival, hide out here, and then depending on my father's reaction to your not being at the table, this will be the code. If I say this to the boy chasing the arrows, you'll know everything's good. My father still loves you. Everything's cool. And you can come out. If I say the other thing, yes, you're right. My father's out to kill you, and you need to get out. You need to run. You need to not show your face anymore. That was the plan, this code language. So, verse 24, David hid in the field, and when the new moon festival came, the king, as in Saul, sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner, who's his general, sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty, as the king's son-in-law and one of his commanders, one of his generals. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought, something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he's unclean. If somebody's doesn't show up at a festival, in the Jewish laws, you were unclean as in ceremonially unclean. And there was lots of things that could make you unclean. Touching a dead animal made you unclean. Being with your wife, if she was on her period, would make you unclean. Different things would make you, quote, unclean and unable to attend a religious festival. So David's not there, and Saul goes, well, maybe he's unclean. The next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again, and Saul said to his son Jonathan, why isn't the son of Jesse, which is David, come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Now, this is the test. How is Saul going to react to David's not showing up? If he goes, because they'd already said, well, David has to go. Remember, the plan is, I'm going to tell Dad, you had a family situation, you excused yourself, you had to go be with your brothers and your father, and if my dad goes, oh, well, that's fine, I'll know you're still in his good graces. If he blows up, I'll know there's a problem. So he asks Jonathan, where's David? Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go. Our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brothers ordered me to be there. Remember, his brother, being the eldest son, is going to be able to give orders to his younger brothers. If I found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. That's why he hasn't come to the king's table. This story is not true. David's not in Bethlehem. David's hiding out, waiting to hear how Saul will respond to his absence at the table. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan. He said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you've sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he must die. That kind of settles the question right there. That's a pretty clear sign that Saul has decided that David is not to be allowed to live. And notice he calls Jonathan the son of a you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, which is what he's calling Jonathan's mother, as in his wife. And he's basically saying, don't you realize that he's endangering your kingdom? You're supposed to succeed me. You're the prince. Don't you realize David is a threat to you being king someday? What is wrong with you, Jonathan? Jonathan's response, verse 32. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? And we know, what has he done? Nothing. He hasn't done anything to show that he is after the crown. He hasn't done anything, even though he was anointed by Samuel and he understands, well, someday I'm supposed to be king. He hasn't done anything to try to make that happen immediately. He hasn't gone after Saul. He hasn't betrayed Saul. He hasn't done anything except be a great warrior and a loyal soldier. And the fact that the crowds adore him isn't his fault. He says, what has he done? Jonathan asked his father, but Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. This is a sign of just how unhinged Saul is. How, he actually at that point throws a spear at his own son. He says, how are you going to succeed and be the next king? And then he throws a spear at him. Saul has gone deeper and deeper over the edge now. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. So Jonathan, who had said, no, my father tells me everything. I would have known if he was going to kill you. He realizes that's not true. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. And on that second day of the month, he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. So Jonathan is deeply moved, depressed, ashamed, angry at his father's obsession now with David, seeing him as a threat when David hasn't done anything to warrant this hatred and this jealousy. So, in the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David, for the prearranged signal. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out to him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Which is the key phrase that means, yes, you're right, Saul wants you dead. He shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. Then parenthetical comment. The boy knew nothing of all this. Only Jonathan and David knew. The boy didn't know anything about this was a code word or a clue or, Jonathan gave his weapon to the boy and said, "Go, carry them back to town." Now, originally he had said, "If I say that, run. If I say that, David, run." But there's a change of plan. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times. In other words, he can't leave without saying goodbye to his friend. He comes out, because that's why he sends the boy back to town. So it's just the two of them now. With his face to the ground, they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. And remember, in that culture, then and now, men kissing each other is not anything out of the ordinary. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendant and my descendant forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to town. So now David truly is a man on the run. There's no more reconciliation, no more opportunities for them to patch up things between him and Saul. He knows now if Saul sees him, he's going to kill him. So he's on the run. So how is he going to evade not just Saul, but Saul's entire army, Saul's generals? How is he going to stay away from Saul? So here's one thing he does. He goes to Nob. If you want to look on this, you see Nob. Okay. There's the first stop. It's at the top, at the north of the map here. He goes to Nob, which is where there is a priest there. This is, I'll remember, David is the one who makes Jerusalem the capital of Israel. And Solomon is the one who builds the temple in Jerusalem. So this is before the temple, and this is before, it gets built in Jerusalem, before Jerusalem is the capital of the country. Not only was there the tabernacle, sort of this portable sanctuary, but there were places where different priests in different towns offered sacrifices all over Israel. Sacrifices were not limited to just the tabernacle. Sacrifices were offered, and priests were scattered in different places. So there's a priest in this place called Nob. He went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech trembled when he met him and said, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" This is odd that David is there by himself, and he realizes there's something's not right here. Something's not right. And David answered to him like the priest, "The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place.'" So this is all, of course, not true. I'm here on a secret mission. I can't tell you what it's about. the king has sent me here on a secret mission, need to know only basis, and I'm going to meet my men later on. I mean, David obviously is having to deceive. And as one commentator said, we're going to see David is going to lie multiple times to keep his life, to avoid Saul, to avoid death. The Bible doesn't seem to condemn David for lying because he's lying to protect his life. When the Bible talks about deceit and lying, it's usually to a fellow Israelite for some devious reason. You're lying to cheat, to steal, to harm. Here David is lying to save his own neck. So it doesn't seem like David is being condemned for making up this story. He says, now then, what do you have to eat? What do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. David is hungry. He hasn't eaten. He needs provisions. What do you have that I can eat? He says to the priest. But the priest answers, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. Okay, 2 mysterious things here. The laws of the worship that we find all the way back in Exodus and Leviticus have all what the priests were supposed to do each day. The offerings they're supposed to make, how to make the guilt offering, the sin offering, the thank offering, this kind of offering, how to offer different animals, how to do it, what to do with the meat. And there's also incense, when the incense needs to be burned, when the lamps need to be lit. It's all kinds of instructions for the worship at these either tabernacle or eventually temple or some of these other places where a priest was worshiping or leading worshipers. And one of the things that in the book of Leviticus, every day there was bread placed for God. And this fresh bread was placed as part of the worship, and it was there for a day. And then at the end of the day, they took that bread off. The priest could then eat it, and they put another fresh loaf, and it was like presenting it to God. But only a priest could eat the bread. It was consecrated bread. Only a priest could eat this special bread, sometimes called the show bread. So the priest says, well, I don't have any food. The only thing I got here is this bread, but you can't eat it because you're not a priest. And also your men, even if I were to let you eat it, your men, it says, have your men kept themselves from women, to be able to partake of the bread, the priest had to have not had sex in a certain number of days before they could eat the bread. So he's like, there's all kinds of reasons you can't have this bread, or your men might not be able to have this bread either. So David says, well, indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual, whenever I set out. In other words, whenever I'm setting out with my men to battle, there's no women. The men's things are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by the hot bread on the day it was taken away. So the only bread available is only priests can eat it. But the priest gives it to David. David's not a priest. He's not even a Levite. Remember, he's from the tribe of Judah. So the priest is really bending the rules here, giving him this bread. Now, this actually, knowing this story, which seems a very obscure story, explains something in the New Testament. So turn to Matthew 12. And this is why knowledge of the Old Testament is often really helpful in understanding some of the things happening in the New Testament. So look at Matthew 12, starting at verse 1 of Matthew 12. It says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. Okay. They're walking through a field of grain. It's the Sabbath, and they're picking off some of the heads of grain and eating them raw. What's the problem with that? They're doing work on the Sabbath. They're harvesting on the Sabbath. And that's work. And work on the Sabbath is forbidden. But Jesus and his disciples are working on the Sabbath by harvesting the grain as they walk through the field, which, by the way, was not theft. The law said anybody who was hungry could walk through and do that. You couldn't put it in a basket. That would be stealing. But if you're eating as you walk through, it was allowed. My grandfather, when I was a kid, told me in the grocery store it was okay to eat the grapes as long as you didn't take them with you. Now, whether he was right about that, I don't know. If in the 60s that was really the law or not, that you could eat the grapes as you walk through the grocery store. But my grandfather told me I could. I don't do it now, but I don't know in the 60s if that really was a thing or not. But anyway, so Jesus and his disciples are doing that. Verse 2. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to Jesus, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." They are working on the Sabbath. Your disciples are lawbreakers. Jesus answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry?" What's he referencing? The story we just read from 1 Samuel. Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. So Jesus references the very story we just read from 1 Samuel. Or haven't you read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple desecrate the day and are yet innocent? In other words, the priests are working on the Sabbath. You know, I work on Sundays. I tell you that one greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Then he goes on to say, going forth on the place he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" So he asked them. He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." In another place, Jesus says, "Man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man." In other words, the Sabbath is a gift of God. It is not to be a noose around your neck. You know, the resting on the Sabbath is not meant to be a hardship. It's meant to be a blessing. You Pharisees have turned it into a hardship instead of making it a blessing. But the reference Jesus uses to, in the Pharisees' eyes, Jesus is just this wandering preacher without any credentials. But who does he reference to say, well, wait a minute, the great King David broke the rules when he was hungry. The great King David's men ate the bread they weren't supposed to eat. In other words, human need outweighs ritualistic laws. Is his point there. So anyway, so now that we have the story of David eating the bread, every time you come to that passage in the New Testament, you go, okay, I know what that's referring to. Anyway, so David gets the bread and picking up he says, so verse 6, 21:6. So the priest gave him the consecrated bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, the Edomite, Saul's head shepherd. This is going to come back to bite certain people in the back. One of Saul's men sees this happen, sees this exchange, sees the priest give David the bread. David asked Ahimelech the priest, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapons because the king's business was urgent. Again, lie. But he's saying what he has to say to get away from Saul. The priest said, well, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. They had placed the sword of Goliath there in the holy place as a memento of God's victory. It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod, which was the priestly garments. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. David says, there's none like it. Give it to me. So now David is now armed with the sword of Goliath. That day, so David's now on the run. He's got food and he's got some men with him, at least traveling with him, but he's pretty much on his own most of the time. David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Oh, wait a minute. Here we are on our map. You see Nob, you see Jerusalem, you see Bethlehem. Now we're going west, we're going to Gath. Who is from Gath? Goliath. So Gath is what kind of city? It's a Philistine city. Gath is a Philistine city. And apparently it's by this point, when David said my men, now it's unclear, did David actually have any men with him at this point, or is he just saying this as part of his story about the secret mission? But when he arrives in Gath, he apparently is alone. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. He goes to a Philistine ruler of a Philistine city. But the servants of Achish, who's the ruler or the king of Gath, said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Which, notice how rumors and stories, in their mind, David's already the king. Isn't this David? Isn't he the king of those people, the Israelites? Isn't this David, the king? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Yeah, even that song has made it to the Philistines. It is probably was maybe sung to them as a kind of a little bit of a rubbing salt in the wound kind of song, I mean, this is they've heard Boomer Sooner in Stillwater. I mean, I know The Eyes of Texas, the song. I mean, so David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So how's he going to hide out in a Philistine city? So David pretended to be insane. David pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. So he's like, this is how I will be safe. I will act crazy. Because in the ancient world, people who legitimately were insane, people who were literally unhinged, insane, the people were kind of afraid of them. They were afraid to kill them. They were kind of afraid of them because they thought the gods have done something to this person. The gods have messed with this person who's so wild and uncontrolled, this madman. So they kind of let them be. And so David, the only way he thinks he can be safe in a Goliath town is to pretend to be a madman. So that's what he does. And Achish, verse 14, I think this is really the funny part of this. Achish said to his servants, "Look at this man. He's insane. Why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me?" In other words, I got plenty of crazy people already. Do I need more crazy people? Am I so short on crazy people that you need to add another crazy person? I just think that's a really funny comment. Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this? Must this man come to my house? So he's like, I don't want this guy, but he's kind of afraid of him because he's crazy. So David hides out in this Philistine town by pretending to be a madman. So we're not sure how long that lasts. Does that last a week? Does it last a month? We don't know. We only know eventually he leaves there in chapter 22. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. Who flocked to David? How is this described? Yeah. Those who are in distress or in debt or discontented. In debt to who? Saul. Discontented with who? Saul. In other words, the people who did not like Saul as king, the people who began to have bad feelings about Saul as king, saw, well, there's an alternative to Saul. There's somebody else. So these disenfranchised, discontented, debtors, etc., all these people start to find out about David. David's on the run, and somehow they find him and they hook up with him. And now he has 400 men. He has his own small force. From there, David went to Mizpah in Moab. From there, he goes to Mizpah in Moab. So I'm not sure if that's on the map here. It's kind of hard to see through all the red lines. I'm not sure. I'm not seeing it here. That doesn't mean it's not here. Well, we keep going. And said to the king of Moab. Oh, wait a minute. Way over in Moab. Okay. See, Moab is there on the east side of the Dead Sea, where it says Moab. I think that's where we're talking about. There he goes now to Moab. He went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me?" So he left them with the king of Moab, his parents. He takes his parents. He's worried that Saul's going to come after them, which would make sense. That Saul would either kill his parents or kidnap them or hold them hostage or do something else to flush David out. So he gets his parents and takes them to Moab and says, "Will you take care of my parents until all of this shakes out?" So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. Okay, now make a connection here. Why Moab? Why Moab? You have a cheat sheet? Right. His great-grandmother Ruth was a Moabite. Remember, in the book of Ruth, Ruth was from Moab. And she marries an Israelite named Boaz. And those are David's, what? great-grandparents. That's David's great-grandparents. So he has a family connection to Moab. So again, it's like, if you didn't know the story of Ruth, you'd go, well, why would he go to Moab? Well, that's why he goes to Moab. His great-grandmother Ruth was a Moabitess. So, but the prophet Gad said to David, suddenly this is, if you're wondering, where did he come from? Okay, there's a prophet. This is not Samuel now. This is a different prophet, a spokesman for God. The prophet Gad said to David, don't stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah. Well, why would he go to Judah? Because that's his people. Remember, that's his tribe. David is from the tribe of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth in Judah. Judah being the largest of the 12 tribes. And again, I didn't really study this map that much to make sure I had every place on it. This is the best map I could find. We know that Judah is there where Jerusalem and Bethlehem and all those towns are. I don't know if I see that town. Anyway, that's where he goes. Those lines are all over the place, right? So, that little episode with the priest Ahimelech, we thought, okay, well, that's over with, right? He gave him the bread, gave him the sword of Goliath. That's all done, right? No. Now, Saul, verse 6, 22:6. Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered. And Saul, spear in hand, was seated under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, with all of his officials standing around him. And Saul said to them, he's got his courtiers, his generals, his men. Listen, men of Benjamin. Remember, he's not of the tribe of Judah. Saul is of the tribe of Benjamin, which was one of the smaller tribes. You remember when Saul was first chosen to be king, he's like, I'm from a small family in a small clan in the smallest tribe. Why would you pick me to be king? And because he's a Benjamite. Benjamin, if you remember, of the 12 tribes, only 2 of the tribes are children of Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin. They were the two sons of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. Leah, Rachel's ugly sister, is the mother of 6 of the tribes, including Judah, the strongest and the biggest. But anyway, he says, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give you, all of you, fields and vineyards? He's shifted to a politician now. Basically saying, don't stray from me, loyalty to me. Don't go over to David's side. Will the son of Jesse, in other words, David, will David give you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you've all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with this son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. This is the ravings of a crazy man. David pretended to be crazy. Saul increasingly is crazy. He's going farther and farther. His paranoia and his jealousy is getting more and more pronounced. But Doeg, the Edomite, where did we see him before? Where did we meet him just earlier? He was there with the priest who gave David the bread and the sword of Goliath. It says he was Saul's his chief shepherd, was there and saw the transaction between the priest and David when he gave him the bread and the sword. Doeg, who's loyal to Saul, is there. Doeg, the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So he let Saul know, I saw David and this priest He gave him provisions, 5 loaves of bread. He gave him provisions and a sword, and he inquired of the Lord to him, gave him advice. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and his father's whole family, who were the priests at Nob. And they all came to the king, and Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me? You and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he's rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today. You traitor, why are you against me? Why have you helped my enemy?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." He told me he was on a secret mission for you. That's why I gave him stuff. He said he was there on your behest. He said he was there serving you. But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your father's whole family." Then the king ordered the guards at his side, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me." So he orders his men to kill not just Ahimelech, but all the priests and all their families. But the king's officials were not willing to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. In other words, he orders them to kill all the priests. And his men are like, killing priests does not, I don't think we can kill priests. That seems like it would really make God mad to kill a bunch of priests. His men are unwilling to do it. But who is willing to do it? The king ordered Doeg, the squealer, the snitch, "You turn and strike down the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. In other words, he killed 85 priests that day. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests. They killed the entire town, the entire village, with its men, its women, its children, and infants, its cattle, its donkeys, and sheep. They wiped out the entire town because of Saul's insane jealousy. They killed them all. But Abiathar, a son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, so one of the priest who gave him the bread, one of his sons escaped. Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, who's the son of Ahitub, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar, "That day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, 'I'm responsible for the death of your father's whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who's seeking your life is also seeking mine. You'll be safe with me.'" So David takes responsibility. He's like, "Yeah, I saw Doeg there. I should have known he would run to Saul. It's my fault." Now, really, is it David's fault? I mean, it's Saul's fault. Saul is the murderer. Saul is the crazy man. Saul is the one who is killing for no good reason. I mean, it's, if anybody is responsible, it's obviously Saul. And you can put the majority of the blame on Saul and some of the blame on Doeg, who probably his report was a little bit one-sided. But David knows that him going to that priest and convincing him to give him a sword and give him bread contributed to all these deaths. So David says, "Yeah, it's my fault. David takes responsibility there. So we continue to go, and David is now still on the run, and he's more and more convinced that Saul is unhinged, and as are we. I mean, Saul has gone from just going after David. He's now killed a whole village out of his bloodlust to kill David. He's now killed priests in his revenge for them helping this man that he sees as trying to overthrow him, who has not done any of that. When David was told, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are looting the threshing floors, he inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? So, even though he's now on the run from Saul, he finds out the Philistines are attacking his people, and he says to God, well, should I go fight the Philistines now? The Lord answered him, go attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, here in Judah we're afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces? I mean, here in our own tribe, here in Judah, there's some element of safety, although we're not exactly safe here. But if we go there, we're even more exposed to Saul, not just fighting the Philistines, but we'll be fighting the Philistines and Saul if we go there. And you see Keilah there is there. I can see it there. If you look see Gath, where Gath is, and go kind of straight to the slightly southeast, there's Keilah. Once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go down to Keilah. I'm going to give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah. They fought the Philistines and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keilah. Now, Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, remember the son of the priest that was murdered, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. This is the priestly garment. So, in fighting off the Philistines, now David's men have what? They got some provisions now, because it says they carried off their livestock. So now David and his 400 men have some provisions from this battle. Saul, we kind of keep going back and forth between what's happening with David, what's happening with Saul. Just like a movie. Here's what's happening with Saul, here's what's happening with David. We're going back and forth. Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and he said, God has handed him over to me. For David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars. In other words, David is playing right into my hands. I've got him right where I want him now. Saul called up all of his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. So, no good deed goes unpunished. David, listening to God, goes and rescues these people, drives out the Philistines, but now Saul says, now I have him. Now I have him right where I want him. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod, again, which is a part of the priestly garment. It's part of the what the priest would wear. David said, O Lord, God of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the town on account of me. So he's convinced that to get to David, Saul would kill the whole town. Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will. And Saul is going to come. And David asked, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord said, they will. Gratitude only goes so far. He saved them. Will they then turn me in? Yep, they will. So David and his men, about 600 in number, went up from 400 to 600 now, left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. So, we can't stick around here. We got to keep on the move. We got to keep on the move if we're going to be safe. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he didn't go there. David stayed in the desert strongholds and the hills of the desert of Ziph. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. So David and his 600 men are constantly on the move, and they're always one step ahead of Saul. Saul can't track them down. David stayed and while David was at Horess in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horess and helped him find strength in God. So Saul can't find him, but Jonathan can. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. So Jonathan realizes, I'm never going to be king. You're the one who's going to be king. And I'll be there to support you. He says, you're going to be king. I can tell. God has put you in the place to be king. He says, deep down, my father knows it too. He knows you are destined to be king. He doesn't want to admit it. He doesn't want to believe it. But deep down, Saul knows you're going to be king. He says, but I will stand with you. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horess. You think about that again. Jonathan is, most, given, this talks about the friendship of these two has often been celebrated, the friendship between David and Jonathan. Most people in Jonathan's position, their father is the king. They are the prince who is expected to succeed his father. Most men in that position would turn against David as his rival. But Jonathan does not. He has a covenant with David. David, most men in his position would see Jonathan as a rival for the fact that God has told him he's going to be the king, and David would kill Jonathan. But he doesn't. Their covenant with each other, they go against what would be the normal practice in almost the whole world, maybe up until a little more civilized time that we've come to live in. I mean, in ancient times, if there was somebody that was alive that would be a potential rival for the throne, kings would kill them. Kings would kill any potential rivals. We read about Herod. Back we have to flash forward to Jesus' day, but we read about Herod the Great. Herod killed 2 of his sons, 2 of his wives, and many other of his close attendants, all because he feared they were going to turn against him. But he murdered 2 of his own sons because he feared they were going to try to kill him first and succeed him. He killed 2 of his wives for being what he thought conspiring against him. Herod the Great, we know his paranoia by sending soldiers to Bethlehem to kill all the baby boys, but he killed his own family. One person in the court of Caesar at the time supposedly said, it is safer to be Herod's pig than to be his son. Because, Jews wouldn't get near a pig to slaughter him. So he would kill his son before he'd kill a pig. That kind of paranoia was not unique to someone like Herod. It was more pronounced maybe in Herod than some. But the idea in the ancient world of killing potential rivals, kings killed potential rivals all the time. But here, Jonathan and David, who are both sort of in line to be the next king, are loyal to each other. They have this covenant with each other. So, verse 19, the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding among us in the stronghold at Horess, on the hill at Hakilah, south of Jeshimon? Hakilah sounds like it should be in Hawaii, doesn't it? Somehow, I don't know why. Now, O king, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for handing him over to the king. So these people are going to curry favor with Saul. They say, we'll hand him over to you. Saul replied, "The Lord bless you for your concern for me. Go and make further preparations. Find out where David usually goes and who's seen him there. They tell me he's very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I'll go with you. If he's in the area, I'll track him down among all the clans of Judah." They're like, "We think we can find him for you and turn him over to you." And Saul's like, yeah, do that. Tell me. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the Arabah south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began the search. And when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went to the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side. Again, they're on opposite sides of the mountain. Saul is looking, and David's over here, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul, saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." Saul's like, I was about to get him. I was close to getting him. Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. So at least he has a sliver of responsibility left to actually protect his people from the Philistines. So he thinks, I'm about to catch David. I'm going to catch him. The Philistines are raiding. Okay. And he has to go break off the pursuit to go fight the Philistines. That's why they call the place Selah Hama'akoth, which means the rock of parting. The rock of parting. Parting, like I'm going to depart. Parting is such sweet sorrow. The parting, the rock of parting, not partying. They weren't partying, parting. David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Okay, now this part 24 this is one of the best stories. Well, they're all good stories, but this is one of the more interesting, and again shows the character of David, and it shows a lot about both men. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, so he finishes off the Philistines. We're not really even told about that battle. Apparently, he's successful against the Philistines. He was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all of Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Okay, so he's going through these deserts, trying to hunt David down, trying to find him and his 600 men. He came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there. And Saul went in to relieve himself. Okay, we know what that means. Okay, that he's going to go relieve himself. And David and his men were far back in the cave. So Saul goes into a cave to, quote, relieve himself, and it's the very cave where David and his men are hiding. And the men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands, for you to deal with as you wish." In other words, Saul is in there by himself, and from the context, he is sitting down. Men would not probably go into a cave to do the other. They would only go into the cave to sit down. Yeah, there was a nearby bush for the other. So if they're going to the cave, it's the other. David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. So while Saul is, squatting in the cave, and remember, caves are dark, of course. David gets a little piece of his robe while he's in the middle of doing his thing. Afterward, because his men say, all you have to do is stab him in the back right now. All you have to do is sneak up behind him and slit his throat. God has literally put him right into your hands. He's defenseless. He's unaware. It's dark. Sneak up behind him and kill him. Sneak up behind him. He's trying to kill you. He's trying to kill you. He's your enemy. Go up and kill the guy. But David does not kill him. David doesn't slit his throat. David doesn't stab him in the back while Saul is in a very compromised position. Afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him. He is the anointed of the Lord." In other words, he is still saying, God, through Samuel, anointed him as king. It is not my place to assassinate him. It is not my place to kill him. He feels bad for even doing what he just did. With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way, with totally unaware of how close that David was literally inches away from him. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, which seems like not a bright thing to do. "My Lord and King." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Just, in other words, the full-on bow. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lift my hand against my master, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand and recognize that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion." In other words, here's the proof. This is how close I was to you with a knife, and I didn't kill you. That should prove to you that I am not after your throne. I am not after your crown. I am not going to kill the king that God has anointed. Now, understand and recognize I'm not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you're hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you've done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. So my hand will not touch you. Now, if anything can get through to Saul, you think this is going to be it. If anything can prove to him David was not after him, that David was not trying to usurp him, this should be the absolute proof of that. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand. When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You are more righteous than I," he said. "You have treated me well, but I've treated you badly. You've just now told me of the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you've treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. And David gave his oath to Saul. And Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. So Saul has a moment of remorse, a moment of clarity even, a moment of realization that God has chosen David. And as he says, you're more righteous than I am. Basically, you're the better man. He calls him my son, because actually, of course, he is his son-in-law still. And Saul, for the moment, gives up his pursuit. For the moment, Saul turns away and goes back to his home. But David does not trust that this is the end. David and his men do not follow Saul into town. They don't think, oh, well, everything's fine now. Everything's peachy now. No, even though Saul has said, yeah, I know, you're going to be the king. Just don't kill my whole family. When you become king, don't wipe out my family. And with that, they part for now. But sadly, Saul's remorse and Saul's sort of moment of clarity is short-lived, because this is not going to be the end of this fight and this struggle between Saul and David. It's got a few more chapters before it finally reaches its end point. So with that, I've got about 7:15. Let's pray. Lord, we're thankful for these stories, thankful for what we see in David, this integrity. Lord, we ask that we know David was not perfect, but you called him a man after your heart, and we want, like him, to be people of integrity, and we want to be people after your heart. And as we see the connections in the scriptures, as we see how Jesus himself uses these stories to illustrate the truth, we just ask that you'd fill us always with wisdom and knowledge, and that you'd walk with us and be with us this day. We pray in your name. Amen. Okay. Anybody who's missing any of the other handouts from previous weeks, or didn't get the one for today that's up there? Anybody didn't get a handout? If you'd like one, please come get it.
Part of it that she gets to go around at the edge of the field and Naomi telling her that she should have.
Right. It was called gleaning. Yeah, gleaning. Yeah, that's in the Old Testament. That's in the laws of Leviticus, that you could, that when you're harvesting the grain or the grapes or whatever else, you're only supposed to go through once. You don't double back and go through a second time. Whatever you miss on the vine or whatever is supposed to be there for the poor. Yeah. It's supposed to be left for, and that's what somebody who didn't have any food at all, after the harvesters go through and pick the grapes or the grain or whatever it is, after they go through once, they're not supposed to go through a second time. They're supposed to leave behind, and that's the poor people could come and pick what was left. Yeah, that's what Ruth did on the fields of Boaz. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you know that story of Ruth, right. Well, Boaz told his servants, he said, make sure you leave some. I mean, he tells them to kind of leave extra, basically. He tells them to leave quite a bit, because Ruth comes home to Naomi with, I can't remember the amount, but for a day's work, it was a lot of grain for somebody who's only picking up the leftovers. But yeah. Yeah, you think, well, why is the book of Ruth even in there in terms of, and it's kind of one of those stories that you don't find out why it's an important story until it's like, and they had a son, and they had a son, and their great-grandson was David. Yeah, and that's why the story is significant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Sure. It looks like a squiggle here, doesn't it? It was like, looks like when my grandson did it. It was like,
I was thinking it looks like the Tasmanian devil.
Yeah.
A Bugs Bunny cartoon.
Yeah.
Should've turned left.
Yeah.
Emailed Tammy about transferring money here and there.
Oh,
Can we bring a puppy to church? Get saved.
oh, yeah.
Get her saved. See? No.
Is it?
She said no. That's it.
Ah.
I can see it.